Hello and welcome in. I am the Eddie McCabe, and you are listening to Evenings with Eddie here on Twitter and Twitch. Basically, for those of you who have no idea, I've been going live just randomly to kind of talk about things while you're on your lunch break. Today we will be discussing basically pro wrestling. A lot of you know me from the New Age Insiders. Basically, I have been talking about pro wrestling for a long time, and now that I am no longer talking about pro wrestling, it comes in and out. When I feel passionate about stuff, I decide that I want to talk about it, so here we are. So I want to talk about a couple of different things because as we start the new year, it wraps up a lot of different shows. New Japan's final show of the year, or big show of the year, as well as Ring of Honor, and Wrestlemania starts to kind of come together and to fruition over the course of January. So there's some interesting things that have kind of come up and kind of happened over the past few weeks. So I figured I'd talk about those things. So we're going to get started with AEW. Now, if you know me, you know that I have been very critical of AEW. I do think that from a promotion standpoint as a whole, I don't think that they hit as many home runs as the internet would want you to believe, or their fan base would want you to believe. I think that they thump their chest a little too much for a program that doesn't quite compete in the way that they want to think they do. So you look at the classic Monday Night Wars, right? The holy grail for wrestling fans, WCW versus WWF, WWE, whatever you want to call it. And they want to recreate that. And what wrestling fans of today don't really understand is that TV was very different back then, right? Back then, back in the day, back in the 90s when this thing was happening, you needed to watch these shows live or you were never going to see them unless you had some sort of situation where you had multiple cable boxes and a VCR that you could record and then watch back later. But for the most part, people kind of just had their brand, they had their show, and they watched it and they stuck to it. And that was kind of what you did. Today's television landscape is so different, and the way that television revenue is generated is just so different that it's really unfair to kind of compare them apples to apples. Because with the advent of DVR, you have the ability to record both programs, one program, and watch the other, or watch neither of them and watch a third show. So, you have this ability to watch TV in such a very different way than you did back in the 90s, that television ratings don't necessarily matter, especially to a company like WWE, which has so many different revenue streams that they're never going to really kind of go under. Ratings only kind of matter for new programs because new programs are going to determine whether or not it's worth keeping. Right? If you're a new show, you need to see those metrics. Okay, so we have this new show and it's going up against a very popular show in primetime. Let's just say The Simpsons, right? And we know that The Simpsons pull in millions of viewers. Well, how does our new sitcom stack up against that? Are we drawing eyes away from The Simpsons? Because from a one-to-one comparison, that's what I'm looking at. I'm not looking to compare it to other sitcoms that take place on different nights. I'm looking to compare it to directly what's in that time slot, right? And I think it's a little disingenuous for AEW to thump their chest about the ratings when they're not going against WWE's A show. Now, I really like NXT. I've always been a huge fan of NXT. If you've listened to the New Age Insiders before, you know just how much I enjoy that product. That being said, it is their third show. That is their third in the list of show priorities, and probably further down that list in terms of actual priorities. And so it's really disingenuous to say, hey, I'm going to, bank all of my viewership comparatively to their C show as opposed to the ratings that their A show draws, which is Monday Night Raw. It's their flagship show. It's the show that they care about the most. And I think having I think having that comparison has always been disingenuous, especially because I'm able to watch NXT on the WWE network, and at no point do those numbers come into effect, right? Nobody looks at how many people are watching it on the WWE network later after the fact, how many views that gets. So like I said, it's a little disingenuous. I don't necessarily find it to be the best comparison and barometer. That being said, I do think that AEW took a year to kind of figure their shit out, right? They needed a year to kind of figure it out and figure out how to be a television program, how to actually be on television, be pro wrestling consistently week in and week out. I do think that they've turned a corner in this year, but it took us a year to kind of get to where fans kind of wanted everybody to be in the first place. You know, you have the Young Bucks as the tag team champions. You have Kenny Omega as the AEW champion. They've done a good job with building Darby Allin. I think Darby Allin, was great as a star. I don't think that he was necessarily the plan, right? I don't think that when you look at Darby Allin, you're like, yeah, that's going to be one of their top guys. I think you look at somebody like Adam Page and was like, oh, that's going to be one of our guys. And, I think that they've done a good job listening to the fan base when they see Darby Allin and, they respond positive to him. He's incredibly fun to watch. He puts up in every single match that he's been in. And so it's been very interesting and very fun to watch him kind of rise to stardom. So that being said, first thing I want to touch on is Sting. I'm really excited that Sting is kind of back in the ecosphere of pro wrestling. I think he's always been I've been a huge fan of his for forever. I've always been a very, very big fan of his, and I love watching him do anything and everything. That being said, I would love to see AEW kind of use him sparingly, because AEW has kind of had this terrible track record of a trend that I've seen where it's let's bring in names to just be the manager, right? They're gonna just be the manager. Jake the Snake, you look at Tully Blanchard, you look at Arn Anderson, the list of guys. Taz just kind of goes on and on, where they just bring in these guys that and remember, and just kind of hope that them being attached to somebody new excites you. Which isn't bad in spots, right? If you just brought in Taz to be the manager for Brian Cage and nobody else, then that'd be, nobody else has managers and stuff in that way, then that's fine. But there's like 3 or 4 different people that kind of are floating around other people. And if Sting is just kind of going to be Darby Allin's guardian angel or something, well, I think it's a little bit of a waste, right? I think it's a little bit of a waste. I don't think it's necessarily the best use of Sting's time, especially because you want to see Sting do more. You want to see him be this weird vigilante vengeance of, angel of justice sort of situation. And I just don't know if he can necessarily do that in 2021, but we'll see. I kind of talk about it as we'll talk about Goldberg later. Goldberg can still do the Goldberg stuff, and I'm not 100% sure that Sting can still do the Sting stuff. And, I think that we'll have to see what he ends up doing and how that ends up going down. Now, the thing that I really wanted to kind of talk about was Being the Elite, right? Being the Elite was such an important and impactful program leading up to All In, but kind of when everybody that was in the Elite just kind of was on their own, right? And it kept you up on a weekly basis when you didn't get to see them on TV every week. And I think now that Being the Elite is a part of AEW, it's a part of this other larger show that has programming on weekly on television as well as dark on their YouTube channel. I think it's tough to say that it really kind of has a place. We're live here on January 12th. So Being the Elite, the television program, or the web show, came out yesterday. It comes out every Monday, and it clocked in somewhere around 40 minutes. And I think that a show that had so much promise and so much purpose has lost all of it in the weekly programming days, right? Because you look at AEW when everybody was wrestling for New Japan and Ring of Honor and all PWG and AAA, and everybody was flying all over the world to different promotions and stuff. It gave these wrestling characters a centralized place to then go out on their adventures, right? Because that was the show. The show was the in-between all of these promotions where you necessarily wouldn't see them wrestle on a weekly basis. But now that they have a television program in which they're wrestling on a weekly basis, it loses a lot of its purpose, because I now tonally don't understand where we are compared to the various AEW storylines, because on the AEW storylines, Matt and Nick act a completely different way than how they do on BTE, and so you look at the characters of SCU. SCU had one of the best gimmicks leading up to All In with this is the worst town I've ever been in, right? And so, yeah, obviously things got to evolve and we don't have to do that again, but Frankie Kazarian is now doing an anger management gimmick that you don't necessarily see all of on AEW Dynamite. And the big one is, how the Dark Order for me, right? On television, the Dark Order is supposed to be the Ministry of Darkness. They're supposed to be far more serious. We're supposed to care far more about them. Now, there are some goofy elements to them, but not as much as the comedy show that the Dark Order has on BTE. Also, the length is too much, right? If I have a 2-hour program on Wednesday and I have a 2-hour program on your YouTube channel, this third hour of programming really needs to kind of be impactful, and it feels like it's just lost in this no man's land. Now, that being said, Kenny Omega becoming the Collector, or however we want to kind of, evolve this character of Kenny Omega, now gives BTE a lot of potential storyline, right? And it gives it purpose again. And that's really exciting, because when you look at what Kenny Omega is doing, if they allow him to kind of really go with this, Kenny Omega wins the AEW title and is now wanting to go through other promotions and basically collect their different championships, which is very exciting, right? Because it harkens back to what BTE was before. We have AEW, where he deals with AEW storylines on Dynamite, but then BTE allows him to go to AAA, go to Impact Wrestling, and allows him to really kind of focus in and really kind of tell that story, that grander story, in his own lens, right? Without having to show what Impact's doing on Impact and what AAA's doing in AAA. Hopefully he goes back to New Japan and does New Japan stuff. But AEW is that centralized book. I bring it back to comic books, right? When there's a big, large event in any comic books, DC, Marvel, doesn't matter. Basically, what they end up doing is they have one title that is the story. I'm going to use Civil War, Marvel's Civil War, as the template here. And so Marvel's Civil War had its own 7-book run. And there were 7 books that were a part of, the Civil War storyline. Now, while that was going on, there was an X-Men Civil War and a Spider-Man Civil War and a Captain America and an Avengers Civil War that were all tied into the story, that were also telling their own individual stories while Civil War was going on. And I think that what Being the Elite needs to kind of go back to is that, because if you look at Gallows and Anderson, for example, they're the Impact Tag Team Champions. And so if they're now going to appear on Being the Elite, that's very interesting, but they're not always going to be on AEW television. They're not going to always be on Dynamite. And I think that having them be a part of Being the Elite allows you to tell that grander narrative that you're trying to push via AEW without having to watch all of the other programming, right? Because if they showed up at Ring of Honor, and I don't necessarily know where to find Ring of Honor, I don't have the television channel that it's on, then yeah, it might be tougher to pay attention, but I can watch Being the Elite, and it gives that program purpose again. I also think that it's time to split the two shows, because I really, really like the Being the Elite champion, right? I like that idea of having this championship belt where they do goofy stuff and they do bits, and it kind of copies up, down, down a little bit, not necessarily in the video game aspect, but the competition amongst friends aspect. And there's a championship, there's a prize to be won, people are competing for it, they're doing dumb, fun games. They played Flip Cup on the last episode, and it was really fun to watch. So having, I think, that branch off into its own show would allow the tone of Being the Elite to shift back to that narrative format that I think it had before. It's just, for my taste, it's just a little too goofy. And I don't mean goofy in the way that, like, it has comedy bits, right? Because everybody has to have a comedy bit. You know, cutting to SCU, bitching about what town they're in and why it's the worst town that they've ever been in is fun and funny, you know, but that's counterbalanced by having, you know, the dramatic story leading up to the announcement of AEW were the phones and the clocks, and it feels like those narratives have been lost, mostly because now they have a weekly show, so they don't necessarily have the ability to kind of tell their own narrative. And I just kind of wish that they would harken back to that a little bit more, because it would be better. It would be a better program if they had the ability to just kind of tell long form stories that are bigger than them, bigger than pro wrestling. It's just, you know, hopefully they can kind of get back to that. And hopefully with Kenny Omega being the collector, we can get back to that sooner. You know, it'll be really interesting, because wrestling's better when there's good stuff going on. And I've said it before, I'll say it again, and I'll say it a million times more, is that storytelling runs pro wrestling. If you can sink your teeth into characters and narrative, then you'll be far more invested and enjoy it far more. And so hopefully Being the Elite, which is easily accessible because it's just on YouTube, it's free on YouTube, you know, can kind of get back to telling that story, that storytelling that I think kind of brought AEW and the Elite to the dance in the first place. Now, shifting over to WWE, we are gearing up for the Royal Rumble. And I think that the Royal Rumble is always fun. It's one of the best shows of the year. You know, everybody kind of tunes into it. People that don't watch wrestling but have watched wrestling in the past like to watch the Royal Rumble. They always enjoy it. One of my best friends growing up, he doesn't watch wrestling. He kind of peripherally pays attention, but he never actually watches consistently on a week-to-week basis. He's never going to sit there and watch, Backlash, right? Just not going to be a thing he watches. But he tunes in for the Royal Rumble. He loves the Royal Rumble. He thinks it's a ton of fun. He's excited for it every year, just because of the gimmick of the match, right? It's high stakes, but it's also easily accessible and very fun to watch. So I think that, we're gearing up for that, and I kind of really like what WWE is doing right now. I think that it's really interesting, really fun. You have a lot of really heavy-hitting storylines that are kind of laying into the Royal Rumble and kind of setting up Wrestlemania season very, very nicely. Over on the SmackDown side of things, you have Roman Reigns, who is finally fulfilling that role as the top guy. Man, I've been saying it for years, that Roman Reigns was never bad at pro wrestling, right? He was never a bad pro wrestler. He was very good at being a pro wrestler. The problem is that he never had character post-Shield breakup, right? Just saying big dog and fist cocking and Superman punching spears was not a character. There's nothing to sink your teeth into. And if you're not an 8-year-old, fan that kind of just gets swept up in that this is the good guy, there's nothing to him, and he was really tough to kind of grab onto from a fan standpoint, because when he was with the Shield had the personality, right? Dean Ambrose was the mouthpiece, Seth Rollins was the excitement, and Roman Reigns was the big, strong Ooga Booga guy, right? And so it was easy to just kind of latch onto all three as a unit and really kind of fall in love with all three. Post-Shield breakup, I'm going to be the good guy, even, the good guy, the bad guy, I'm the guy, everything was wooden, stilted. It just didn't feel like the character had any teeth to him, right? It didn't feel like Joe Anoa'i liked playing Roman Reigns. It's funny because when you do a film, right, when you make a movie, one of the things you do is a table read. And what the table read is accomplishing is you get all the actors in a table and they all read the script together. And you read the script together in your part. And as the writer, director, and producer of a film, your job is to sit there and listen, right? And you listen to all of those actors. And you listen to the way that they're saying the lines and the way that they're giving pronunciation to certain words and things like that. Because we all know a friend, we all have those friends, and they'll read something out of a book, and the words just don't make sense coming out of their mouth, right? They're not technically wrong words, but they just don't make sense coming out of that person's mouth. It's not something that person would ever say. And so your job as the writer or the director or the producer is to realize that and then make an adjustment to the script, right? Just to change it so that the words feel comfortable coming out of that person and that character's mouth. And that's how Roman Reigns, prior to coming back, that's how he's felt, right? It's just felt like suffering, succotash, son. And it's just like, oh, that man has probably never said those words, let alone those words in that order to anybody before. And so it feels weird, it sounds stupid, and that person probably shouldn't say those things again, And I think that having the character come in and be redeveloped as this head of the table has made Joe Anoa'i a far better performer, because I think he believes everything he's doing. He feels far more comfortable in this skin, and it's very well written. The character has a point of view. The head of the table, where he's going to do everything to provide for him and his family, is awesome. It's so good. And so now the Royal Rumble match that he has set up for himself is so quintessential bad guy. It's wonderful. It's absolutely, absolutely wonderful. Because wrestling fans have a tendency to want to slay the dragon in chapter 1. And not realize that I have, 1,000 pages to go, right? And this is classic bad guy. I've set myself up to beat this guy that I know I'm going to beat. He's going to wrestle Adam Pearce at the Royal Rumble, and he's going to beat him handily, right? And so I would be shocked, absolutely shocked, if the winner of the Royal Rumble doesn't come out of SmackDown, and we don't see who that is. Shinsuke Nakamura was the last person to get beat up. He's on the table. Daniel Bryan, Kevin Owens. Those three guys are on the short list of SmackDown Royal Rumble winners, right? And it's because Roman Reigns is insulating himself so that he doesn't lose the championship. Because again, it's not about wrestling at the Royal Rumble, it's about wrestling at WrestleMania. And I think that it's absolutely beautiful. I think that we have so much leg room to grow here with the head of the table. I also wouldn't be surprised if whoever challenges Roman Reigns at WrestleMania loses, just because I don't see this character, needing to outgrow that championship. He is too captivating not to fully explore where this goes. And I'm really excited to see kind of where it goes. And that's something I haven't been able to say since Roman Reigns broke off from the Shield, back when they split, several years ago. So it'll be very interesting to see where that goes because, again, him wrestling Adam Pearce is going to be simple. It's going to be stupid. They're going to, he's just going to beat him up so that we just have a Universal Championship match on the card at the Royal Rumble. But there's no actual competition that I think he has. That being said, we now shift over to Bill Goldberg returning to WWE to challenge Drew McIntyre for the WWE Championship. Now, there was something interesting that I didn't even realize, and I know it's a semantics thing, right? Because different titles have meant different things in WWE all for the past, decade and a half, right? That Bill Goldberg has never won the WWE Championship. He has been the Universal Champion, he's been the World Heavyweight Champion, he's been the WCW Heavyweight Champion, but he's never been the WWE Championship. And that was brought to my attention, and I do think that was really interesting and kind of gives this whole thing legs, right, that he's never done that. And while I think it's a dumb semantics thing because, this isn't it's not the talk of today, but it's the talk of, maybe a show later down the road, is that, there should only be one top championship. Having two is just weird and semantic, and it's stupid. But again, I think people get hung up that Goldberg is coming back to challenge for the championship. One, fictional characters doing fictional fighting. So really, who cares? The points are made up and nothing matters. So ultimately, who cares? But this gives Drew McIntyre something credible to do because the Universal Championship match over here is such a joke. Right? It's such a joke because we know Roman Reigns is just going to toy with this guy for 5 to 10 minutes that having a big bout heavyweight title match over here with the WWE Championship makes it feel worth watching, right? It makes the undercard of the rest of the Royal Rumble worth watching because Drew McIntyre versus Bill Goldberg is a heavyweight clash. That's an important thing. But I don't expect Drew McIntyre to lose, right? Because I don't think that he should leading into WrestleMania. I'm not 100% sure what we're going to end up doing with Drew McIntyre in, at WrestleMania, which is exciting. That's always exciting because then it allows, while I do think that whoever is going to win again comes from SmackDown, I do think that, it's very interesting because the field is so wide open. I also wouldn't be shocked if The Miz sneaks his way into it. There's a reason why they gave him the briefcase back, and Goldberg versus Drew is a perfect example for Miz to kind of sneak in and sneak away, so we'll see. We'll see how that ends up playing out. But again, I think that it's the type of big heavyweight bout that gets eyes on the Royal Rumble again. It makes headlines. It gets people excited. And like I said earlier with the Sting stuff, Goldberg can still do the Goldberg stuff. You're not asking him to do a lot of heavy lifting. We're not asking him to do an Iron Man match, for Christ's sake. So, having him go and wrestle Drew McIntyre gives us something on the undercard to watch in between the two Royal Rumbles. And I'm really excited about it. I've kind of found in my time away from the New Age insiders that looking at pro wrestling with a less critical eye makes you enjoy it a little more, right? Because I'm not necessarily watching it so critically, I'm able to enjoy the smaller moments, right? I'm not looking at things in such a critical way that takes me out of the enjoyment of the fictional programming, and I'm able to enjoy it again. There's so much good going on here, especially in a year where live entertainment is gone, right? We can't because of COVID-19. We can't have live entertainment. WWE and AEW have found ways to get around that and put on weekly content, especially in a world where your favorite television shows have been on hiatus. They haven't been able to actually perform and, record and go into production for new seasons. So having them be here has been great. I think that, like always, there's ups, there's downs, but I think that now that we're heading into WrestleMania season, we're definitely heading into one of those up periods. I'm excited. I think people get too hyped up and critical when it comes to wrestling and, why does this person get to drop out of the sky and get a title match? The points are made up. Wrestling is all about moments. If you think about everything, why did Andre the Giant all of a sudden turn on everybody and side with Heenan so we could get a title shot, right? If you think about it too hard, it doesn't make sense. So, just enjoy it. I think, we're heading into the most fun time in wrestling, and as COVID cases rise, and as things seem to kind of get bleak with all the stuff that's happening politically in the United States, I think it's time to just kind of lose yourself. The willing suspension of disbelief is absolutely fantastic. I'm excited to see where the collector of Kenny Omega goes. Maybe Kenny Omega ends up in the Royal Rumble and he collects the WWE Championship. Who knows? I don't think it's going to happen. Probably never going to happen. But God, would that be fun? And I wish we had that kind of fun around here. But c'est la vie, right? So I want to hear from you. I know that there's a ton of vocal people out here that, love pro wrestling and, are pining to talk about it. So I want to hear from you. Find me at The Eddie McCabe. This is going to be on YouTube. I'm going to make it a podcast so you'll be able to listen to it. So subscribe to The Eddie McCabe, Evenings with Eddie. You can find it on Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, Podomatic, Glork Norval, all those fun things. Thank you for tuning in. You can follow me at The Eddie McCabe on all forms of social media. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all at The Eddie McCabe. So thank you very much. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you have a lovely, lovely afternoon, and I'll see you real soon.